The Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr Speaker, can I acknowledge the member who's just resumed his seat? He's the Deputy Chair of the Government Administration Committee. He didn't praise himself, as I'm sure he's not inclined to, but I want to commend his work on that committee on this bill. I want to commend the Minister who introduced the bill, and I'm sorry, but it's not the Honourable Mark Mitchell. It was actually the Honourable Maurice Williamson. What, these new ones are saying who? That is very unkind. The Honourable Maurice Williamson is still a member of this House. He's not due to give his valedictory for another 7 or so weeks. And he started this process and he welcomed it in 2010 alongside the Honourable Simon Power, who has gone on to greater and better things, working for a bank, I understand now. But what a relief it must be for the National Party to be debating something as dry and technical, where everyone's in agreement, is the land transfer bill, after the week they've had. I couldn't have imagined a better scenario for the opposition party to us going into their annual conference, going into their weekend conference. What a week, which wasn't a good week, did they ever have. So moving on to debate the land transfer bill must be just a blessed relief at this time. Mr Speaker, even though this was a good bill emanating from a fine piece of collaborative work from the Law Commission, from Crown Law and the New Zealand Law Society, it still leaves a big hole in the land registration process unfilled. And I want to challenge the new Minister, who's made a fine effort to get on top of the details of this bill. In fact, I think he was on the Select Committee when we heard the submissions, so he may well have had an advantage going into his ministerial role. But either way, he's on top of the detail, you could tell from his third reading speech. I want to challenge him to fix the hole that has been left unfixed by his predecessor, and that is in the absolute shambles in the Overseas Investment Office. It's just a mess. They have become a laughingstock, and if the Minister isn't careful, they will drag him down with them, and I don't think that should happen. If the Minister is visionary and bold and courageous, he'll be able to make something out of the mess that is the current Overseas Investment Office. We've seen where they're not even able to access robust databases in which we can have confidence and get information for us. The Honourable Mark Mitchell's predecessor decided to respond to the shambles of the Overseas Investment Office by making the shambles work faster, just speeding up the wet bus ticket consent process. That's not good enough for a country that prides ourselves on transparency and openness, and it's not good enough for the Minister to let them get away with this. So that's my challenge. While supporting this legislation, it doesn't address the biggest problem that that Minister is facing. Mr Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, this bill is a result of a very good bit of collaborative work done by the Law Commission, Crown Law and the New Zealand Law Society. The primary aim was to modernise the legislation. I'm sorry to interrupt the honourable member. The time has come for me to leave the chair. Members, this debate is interrupted and set down for resumption next sitting day, and the House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. tomorrow. Good evening.